Hello folks, in this video I'm going to discuss the intriguing prospect of Mortars being added to Hell Let Loose. Now this has been something the community has talked about since Hell Let Loose started as a Kickstarter project. The original developers, Black Matter, even had deployable mortars in their roadmap, although they sadly never managed to implement them. But recently, Team 17 revealed in a Reddit Ask Me Anything event that mortars might play a role in being a solution for artillery. Which leads me onto the themes of this video. What is the current issue with artillery? How could mortars solve that issue? And how should mortars work if they were added to Hell Let Loose? First up, as XI Spectre outlined in his question in the Ask Me Anything event, the current artillery and recon team meta in Hell Let Loose is a hot topic for the player base. At the moment, 3 stationary artillery guns are present in the middle HQ for both teams in the warfare game mode, and on the defending side in the offensive game mode. Funnily enough, the attacking side on offensive don't get any artillery support, which isn't realistic at all. Artillery in Hell Let Loose is intended to provide fire support across the majority of the map, but usually not as far as the final strong point before the enemy's HQ. This is obviously done for balance reasons, so RT can't crush the enemies in their own HQ. When used well, artillery is highly effective at both decimating enemy infantry with high explosive shells and providing smoke cover with smoke shells for your team to advance. It is the effectiveness of a good artillery battery, either with 1 or all 3 guns, with loaders and gunners being directed by the commander and other squad leaders near the front, which requires your opponent to do something about it. Because of the outpost and garrison restriction on normal infantry squads, which means you can only build OPs or Garys in the first 2 lines of your enemy's territory, one of the only effective counters to artillery at the moment is sending a recon squad to deal with them, since they can build OPs anywhere on the map. The only other possible counter is sending a fast-moving vehicle, usually a recon vehicle or possibly a light tank, to take out their RT and camp the middle HQ to stop them from getting back on the guns. But most of the time it ends up being the recon team's job to set up an OP nearby and camp the artillery pieces and the middle HQ to stop them using the artillery. This can be tedious for both the recon team and the players trying to use the artillery. But since it is the only real viable counter to artillery at the moment, which is probably devastating your team, it often falls on the shoulders of the recon team to deal with it. The worst situation is when you're in a public match and commanders request a recon team to deal with the RT, but they straight up ignore them and go off and do their own thing, leaving their own team to get ripped apart by enemy artillery. So in a nutshell, there you have the issue, with the current iteration of artillery in Hell Let Loose. There are a number of suggestions floating around for possible solutions to this, but I will share mine and tell you how mortars could play a key role in this potential fix for the unsatisfying and cheesy gameplay loop of having to camp RT as a recon squad. First thing to say is that artillery should play a big role in Hell Let Loose. In World War II, as well as other modern wars, artillery played a pivotal role, and there is nothing more immersive as seeing your squad and teammates get turned to mush by a devastating artillery strike. This is one of the coolest things about Hell Let Loose. I'm sure we all remember the first time we experienced a well-coordinated artillery strike which wiped out you and your whole squad in an instant. In my proposal, artillery barrages should become a commander ability, which like bombing runs or strafing runs should cost munitions to use. I think this ability should be quite costly and have a significant cooldown because it will be able to deliver a really devastating salvo of strikes on a target or provide a large and lasting smoke screen for your troops. In my idea, deployable mortars would replace the stationary HQ artillery as the main form of fire support for your team. The reason to include mortars while moving the bigger artillery to a commander ability is because players should still be able to enjoy raining fire on enemy strong points after carefully calculating where your rounds should land to help soften up targets before your team attacks or to disrupt enemy attempts to storm your positions. Of course, this weapon system will need to be finely balanced so it isn't overpowered and game breaking. Unlike the current artillery in the game, there should be able to be built anywhere on the map where there is suitable terrain. With the standard fitted supplies, a support player can drop the single crate. I think mortar teams should be limited to a maximum of 2 per team, just like you can only have 2 recon squads. These mortar teams should be made up of 3 people, a mortar squad leader with binoculars and access to the command chat to coordinate strikes, and 2 others to serve as a gunner and loader, as you currently have for the artillery guns, which have 2 positions for those players. For balance purposes, the range of the mortar should be much shorter than the current artillery guns. This would prevent mortars from being just built way back in your own team's HQ to lob rounds at your enemies without much chance of detection. Instead, mortars would need to be built relatively close to the area you intend to shoot at. This is because I feel they should be close enough to the action that your opponent will be able to spot or hear where they are flying from, so they're able to figure out a way to counter them. This would eliminate the exclusive role of recon to deal with enemy artillery. Now, teams will be able to use the full range of possible responses to enemy mortar fire. Perhaps some counter battery fire of their own from their own mortar teams, or sending infantry, tanks, or a strafing run, or even a recon squad to take them out once they're detected. This gameplay should feel more fun and satisfying for the mortar teams and their opponents, as the mortar teams will need to find good spots to set up their mortars, and your opponent will need to keep their eyes and ears peeled to spot enemy mortars and counter them. That brings me to the question of munitions for these mortars. I think they should use supplies dropped by support players, supply trucks, or supply drops as their ammunition. Let me explain how I see this working. A single mortar round should cost 10 supplies. This means a support player can drop 50 supplies near the mortar to provide enough ammo for 5 rounds. Keeping the mortar supplied with ammunition would therefore require coordination with the wider team. Supply trucks could drop supply crates each with 50 supplies, or if they drop 2 crates that would be enough for 30 supplies, enough for 30 rounds. Alternatively, a commander could drop a supply drop with 100 supplies to provide 10 mortar rounds. This might sound like a lot, but remember, the mortar shell will be less powerful than the current artillery shell, so its area of effect won't be as destructive as current artillery. The exact cost of supplies per round will need to be properly tested before it goes live in the game to make sure this mechanic isn't overpowered. It might be that each round should cost more than 10 supplies, but that will be determined later. In my mind, the mortar squad should be made up of a squad leader with a similar loadout to the current infantry squad leader, and instead of having options for the full range of infantry roles, in normal squads, they should be limited to 1 support player and 1 rifleman in the squad to act as the gunner and loader. The support player will be able to periodically drop supplies to give the mortar ammo. Providing supply trucks or supply drops to give more ammo will of course run the risk of revealing the location of your mortar team, so teams will have to be tactical about how obvious they are when resupplying their mortar teams. In addition, I think it will encourage engineers to build manpower nodes near to the mortars to give support players a quicker cooldown for their supplies. It will be also interesting to allow your engineers to use the supplies to build up sandbags around your mortar to give them extra cover from the enemies. As with AT guns, there should be a limit of how many mortars can be active at one time, limited to 1 per mortar team. As I said, there being 2 mortar teams available for each team, so there could only ever be 2 mortars available for each side at one time. These mortars, once built, will be stationary. If your team advances, the mortars will need to be redeployed by the mortar team squad leader, and new fortifications and supplies will need to be placed near the new mortar to protect and supply with ammo. To help keep the mortar teams balanced and not overpowered, mortar teams shouldn't have access to their own outposts, but instead rely on garrisons or half-tracks as their spawn points. This means if they were taken out, they could have slightly further to travel before they could man those mortars again. In addition, mortars should be vulnerable to the same things as AT guns, meaning enemy AT rockets, enemy tank fire, satchels and such should completely destroy them, as well as bombing runs or precision strikes, or even perhaps strafing runs. There you have it. There's my suggestion for how mortars could work as a possible solution for the artillery issue. This would still give players who enjoy the artillery mechanics a way to continue that playstyle without being overly overpowered, but free recon from the dreaded go camp the middle HQ for the whole game role, which they are often relegated to at the moment. What do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments. What do you think of this suggestion? Do you think it could work?